Larry Nelson's voice booms through the arena as he presents the two teams about to clash in a six-man melee. But before the bell rings, my attention is hijacked by Greg Brady's. What in the world was the thought process behind that getup? A belly shirt, headband, and camouflage pants make him look like a bizarre mashup of a Vietnam War veteran and a reject from a bad 80s music video. It's as if he raided the costume department of a low-budget war movie and emerged with a look that's equal parts Agent Orange and homeless vagrant. The storyline might have been that he survived Sergeant Slaughter's boot camp, but in reality, he looks like he just stepped off the set of Platoon, minus the grit and plus a healthy dose of twinkiness. Meanwhile, Scott Hall, once the epitome of machismo in the WWF, now exudes an unsettling creepiness, like a walking, talking porn star who's one step away from being featured on a To Catch a Predator episode. The Curt, Hennig, and Scott Hall tag team, a staple of the mid to late 80s wrestling scene, almost didn't come to be. Vern Gagne originally wanted to pair Tom Zenk with Hennig to fill the babyface tag team slot, but Zenk had other plans, abandoning ship for Portland. And so Scott Hall stepped into the void, and the rest, as they say, is history. The ring announcer's booming voice introduces a Chicago sports institution, a man who's been the soundtrack to the city's pro wrestling scene for nearly a decade. This veteran announcer has also had the privilege of working alongside baseball legends, including the iconic Jack Brickhouse. But as he takes the mic, he can't resist taking a trip down memory lane, waxing poetic about the good old days when wrestling was real. His nostalgic tangent is preceded by a wistful remark, something to the effect of, "I wouldn't be tempted to reminisce if I weren't really here." And then he's off, lost in the haze of yesteryear. Meanwhile, in the ring, Nick Bockwinkel is putting on a master class. He takes down Curt Hennig with a vicious hip block, his sneer a testament to his old school swagger. A slam follows, and it's clear that Bockwinkel's brand of wrestling is a far cry from the high-flying antics of the younger generation. He's not just going through the motions, he's selling every move like his life depends on it. Hennig fires back with a series of quick moves, an arm drag, a hip toss, and a body slam, but Bockwinkel's resistance is palpable, as if he's genuinely trying to avoid taking a fall, with Bockwinkel retreating to the corner before tagging in Larry Zbyszko, dubbed the Notorious Crybaby by the ringside commentator, Nelson. Zbyszko lives up to his reputation, a fierce lockup. A side headlock and shoulder block follow, with Hennig kicking out from the back and landing a slick arm drag. The tag is made to Scott Hall, who towers over the competition, his massive frame and intimidating presence in the ring. We're not in the midst of a 1998 wrestling renaissance, but Scott Hall's physique is still an intimidating force to be reckoned with, a behemoth of a man who commands attention. The action unfolds with Bockwinkel clinging to the ropes for dear life, desperate for a tag, but so, with a mischievous glint in his eye, decides to play a cruel trick, shaking the ropes and sending Bockwinkel tumbling back into the ring like a rag doll. Meanwhile, Greg Gagne seizes the opportunity to grab Larry by the hair from the apron and deliver a vicious hot shot. When Greg finally gets the tag, he unleashes a flurry of middle rope stomps to the arm, a comical moment that only adds to the chaos. It's hard not to notice Greg's, let's say, unique attire. While everyone else looks like they just stepped out of a wrestling catalog, Greg appears to have raided a thrift store from the 1960s. His army pants and dated hairstyle make him look like he's about to protest the Vietnam War, not compete in a high-stakes wrestling match. And yet, despite being surrounded by wrestlers with far more skill and credibility, Greg somehow manages to hold his own. He's like a fish out of water, but he's determined to make a splash. As the match wears on, Greg starts to find his footing, busting out a series of impressive moves, a leapfrog, a monkey flip, and a flying head scissors that leaves the crowd gasping. He tags in Curt Hennig, who quickly takes control, only to be cut off by Zbyszko's thunderous back suplex. Bockwinkel seizes the opportunity to deliver a crushing knee lift and suddenly the match is anyone's game. Ray Stevens unleashes a vicious throw, sending Curt Hennig crashing to the mat. Zbyszko seizes the opportunity, slamming him onto the grass outside before delivering a devastating knee drop from the apron. Meanwhile, Bockwinkel sneaks into the ring, catching Curt off guard with a cheap shot. The referee is too busy arguing with Gagne about a botch tag to notice. Zbyszko takes advantage of the distraction, cinching in a tight abdominal stretch on Curt, but when Gagne finally manages to tag in, the referee waves it off, deeming it an illegitimate tag. The heels continue to gang up on Hennig, with Zbyszko landing a picture-perfect suplex and nearly scoring a pinfall. Bockwinkel then takes his turn, hot-shotting Curt and sending him tumbling onto the ropes in a heap. What's remarkable about Bockwinkel is that even in his twilight years, he's still a master of his craft. Just a few years shy of retirement, he's still out-wrestling men half his age. In an era where wrestlers frequently performed in the same towns and arenas, Bockwinkel's ability to adapt and innovate was crucial. He couldn't rely on the same old sequences and crowd pleasers. Instead, he had to stay one step ahead of the audience, constantly surprising them with new moves and tactics. Bockwinkel's unpredictability was his greatest asset. Without a set finisher or predictable sequence, he was free to improvise and respond to his opponents in the moment. This made him a formidable opponent, capable of elevating even the most mediocre wrestlers to new heights. Curt Hennig, meanwhile, is starting to find his footing, landing a beautiful flying crossbody that nearly scores a pinfall. But when Ray Stevens breaks it up, Curt and Bockwinkel collide in a stunning display of athleticism, with Curt flying across the ring in a blur of motion. The action spills outside once more, with Zbyszko tagging in and targeting Gagne. Poor Greg. It's a wonder he can deliver a decent punch, let alone a victory. His slow, plodding style makes him a less than compelling babyface, but he's trying his best to keep up with the likes of Bockwinkel and Zbyszko. The action unfolds like a wild tornado, with a double noggin knocker igniting a full-blown melee. Zbyszko and Bockwinkel are sent careening into each other, while Stevens takes a vicious ride over Curt's prone body, culminating in a thunderous Scott Hall power slam that seals the deal. The crowd is delirious, celebrating the hard-fought victory of Gagne, Scott Hall, and Curt Hennig over Ray Stevens, Nick Bockwinkel, and Larry Zbyszko at Superclash. The clock reads 12 minutes and 30 seconds, but it feels like an eternity since the bell rang. Scott Hall, resplendent in his tassel-adorned attire, is the epitome of cool. Meanwhile, Gagne's camouflage getup, complete with a torn shirt, looks like it was conjured up by a reject from a bad 80s action flick. Special guest announcer Jack Brickhouse waxes poetic but somehow forgets to introduce the heel team. It's a miracle he remembers his own name. The American Wrestling Association is in full-on gimmick mode, with Gagne channeling his inner Rambo, minus the charisma and acting chops. Scott Hall rocking a Magnum PI. Meets porn star vibe and Curt Hennig stuck in awe. Shucks mode, which never quite suited him. The ring announcer is determined to regale us with a novella-length intro for each wrestler, including the referee sucking the life out of the crowd's enthusiasm. This is a battle of old school versus new breed, with Hall's majestic mustache stealing the show. Jack Brickhouse takes his sweet time introducing the match, reminiscing about the good old days and stretching the intros to a whopping 3 minutes. Finally, the bell rings, and Hennig and Bockwinkel kick things off. The crowd starts to get invested, but the action grinds to a halt for a few seconds, leaving everyone wondering what just happened.